And if you have other, there you go. If you have other issues, please send an email to Martin Lang at SCAT. He is our technical support person. You can see his email at the bottom of this screen. So with that, let me hand over to Andreas Weber from the governance network of SDC for a few welcoming words.
Thank you, Riff, and thank you everyone for joining. Before we start this webinar, I would just like to start with some general reflections. And especially with these two pictures. So we know that water challenges or any problem in the end can be very challenging. And there are different ways to conceptualize problems. And we see here one way that this is normally done. So it can be, we have complicated problems, for example, assembling a car, and we have complex one. And the main difference is that in a complicated problem, normally we have a high degree of control, a high degree of order, and therefore also predictability. And in the complex problem, these are the ones that do not follow static rules, and then the results are also not predictable. So now when we take this to the water sector, we know that normally the challenges we face are both complicated and also complex. There is normally a technical component, for example, how we construct the sewage system, which is normally the complicated part. But then there is always, wherever we work, there's a human factor and there is a political component. And this brings in this complex part, the one that is hard to predict, hard to have all the control. And these are all the questions around who has access to water, who pays for water services, for example, who decides, etc. Now, we suggested to have this webinar because we think that PEA is a very interesting tool and approach to better understand the complex part of the problem. Because if we want to develop and have successful development intervention, we need to make sure that our interventions are technically sound, but they also need to be politically smart. And this is why the RésEAU, so the SDC's water network, and also SDC's governance network joined forces, because we really want to mainstream and promote this way of thinking and working politically in the water sector and beyond. And I would just like to thank Anne and Javier, because they will present today two real-world cases, which then also show a bit how this kind of thinking can impact the way we approach these problems and can contribute to have better results. This is all from me, and I hand over quickly to Daniel Maselli from the RésEAU, from SDC's Water Network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas. Yes, a warm welcome from my side as well. I think it's great that we join forces. We want to understand complexity and be able to handle it. So it needs joint efforts. And that is the first step to lose the fear of addressing complex issues, because in development cooperation, I think we try, but we don't always succeed to really have good results and have an impact that we are striving for, because we do not spend enough efforts to really understand the systems, and then to be able to trigger systemic changes, and also to be somehow societally transformative in our activities. And that's where I think we will be able to see the value of political economy analysis this afternoon. We also need to understand that when we enter into the scene in a specific context, we need to really be aware that we normally have little knowledge ourselves from that context if you haven't been living there or have been born there. So we try to empower people, but at the same time we depower others. Then we may create more problems than we are actually providing solutions. And I think that that is really where we need to be careful, and where this tool ultimately and this process is very important. So yes, doing or going through a political economy exercise has two goals. One, of course, is at the end to have a better understanding, but it's also the way, the process, that is as much important as the end result, a report, for instance. And I think both are really necessary to be able to be more smart, as Andreas was saying. And with no further ado, I give the mic back to our facilitators. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Danielle. And let me just give a quick introduction to what we'll be up to today. We're just finishing the welcome and introduction, and we'll be having a keynote address from Professor Tobias Haller from the University of Bern, the Institute for Social Anthropology, and he will be giving a quick reflection on the recent RésEAU brief number 4, which was focused on political and economic analysis in the water sector. And after that, we get into these 2 cases that were mentioned previously, which is a case presented by Javier Zubieta from Helvetas Bolivia, and a case by Anne Jocelyn from the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK. Then, so at that point, we will ask you to choose actually which group you go into to get into these deeper discussions. You'll first hear a kind of a teaser presentation from each case to help you decide which one you would like to join, and then you get into more of the details of the case when you join the breakout group. That's about a half hour, hopefully, that discussion. Then we come back together and we'll have a little bit of a report back and a little bit of discussion before we close. So just to introduce the first speaker that we have, Tobias Haller. As I say, he'll be giving a presentation of on the brief that was recently published. And Tobias, perhaps I can hand over to you. And I think you'll be sharing your own screen, is that right?
Yes, that is right. But yeah, thank you. Okay. Yes. Welcome, everybody, and many thanks to the organizers actually to invite me. Again, my name is Tobias Haller. I'm a social anthropologist. I'm working at the Institute of Social Anthropology at the University of Bern. I did a lot of research in African context on resource governance, specifically the commons in African floodplain wetlands, but I'm also supervising a lot of students working on conservation and also on indigenous peoples issues. Perhaps my take on water issues is water as being a connected, important resource. As I was working on pasture, wildlife and fisheries and local governance issues in larger projects in Africa, in 6 floodplain areas in Africa, in Western, Eastern and Southern African countries. And when I was invited for this webinar, Political Economy Analysis, I was very much interested in also this policy brief, and I had a look at it. And I saw that a lot of work has been done, a lot of energy has been invested with many important points. But on the other hand, I also have got some critiques from the social anthropological perspective. And as you know, we are a discipline that looks closer at local contexts, also at historical developments and at local, what we call emic views and perspectives. So what I'm saying now is a bit a critique from that context, also fueled by some case studies, which I will hint to in one way or the other. Let me come to the first point. And now I don't see my whole slide here. Can you see the title of the slide?
Water is a common pool resource.
Yes, I can't see it myself. Actually, my first point and my first critique is that the issue of water as a common pool resource is not sort of really mentioned, or as a commons is not really mentioned in the policy brief. And since the work of Elinor Ostrom, water resources are shown that they can be managed in common property by local communities. At the moment, we have a lot of governance that actually comes not from local communities, but from the state and from the private sector. And Elinor Ostrom shows that actually local people historically up to now were able to define rules and regulations, so-called institutions for water governance. So, however, the word commons, common property, etc., are missing in the brief. And you see here 2 pictures, one from northern Cameroon, pastoralists managing water for cattle, and the other one from the Philippines, which is very well known how local communities are managing in a very sort of differentiated way water for rice production. fresh water is actually a commons, and anthropological research shows this, that most of freshwater bodies in most societies before colonial time in the global south were actually part of a common property system in one way or the other, meaning that we had members of a local group, and within that local group, rules and regulations on how to share rights to water, access to water, also linked to other resources such as wildlife, fisheries, pasture, water for irrigation, etc. But also before state building in the global north, we can see that historical studies show, for instance, in Switzerland, that water was often managed under common property regimes for several uses, for irrigation, etc. As a matter of fact, still today, large bodies of water within Switzerland, for instance, are managed by commoners, by Bürgergemeinde, Patriziati, or by bourgeoisies in a very sustainable manner. Property rights changes since colonial times have actually changed these collective rights to state as well as to private property regimes. So there has been a historical transformation, and often water governance doesn't pay actually attention to this. This comes often with problematic distributional and effects. Ostrom's interest in the commons was fueled by overuse of groundwater in California, which you see the picture below, shows the problem of bad also state coordination. If we just leave everything to the state. While collective water management, as I indicated in Switzerland, shows also solution for sustainable water collective governance since the Middle Ages. You have these canals, you have also other ways that showed that actually collective organizations had a set of regulations on how to maintain water governance. The Canton of Bari is very important in this respect. It is also important to see that social anthropological research in drylands and in wetlands shows that these groups had a very high capacity to organize and coordinate use in local groups, also embedded in often other views of what water means in more spiritual context. You see on the picture from your perspective on the left below, a water ritual be made to appease ancestral spirits for a collective fishing event in Zambia, coordinating time and use of fish, while on the picture to your right, you see actually a water ritual sign of water management and governance in Bari, where also water has been shown from social anthropology that it was very, very well regulated and coordinated in very complex systems. The positive case in point is exactly what I mentioned last. Water temples in Bari was shown by the US anthropologist Stephen Lansing by his classical work, that coordination via water temples and via rituals done in a lake of a volcano crater, that this was the way to coordinate a large body actually of people, when to open water channels, when to organize so-called SUBACs, water collective organizational groups, in order to manage the water in a wise way and to coordinate also the flow of water. Stephen Lansing also made some tests with computer models and could show thereby that actually the way that people are doing this, coordinating in a ritual way, was a very, very good way to do, because there was a constant communication set by ritual days to manage the rice fields in this area. We have negative examples. Undermining of rights to river and floodplain management context, by undermining local water rights. In many parts in the floodplain areas where I've been working, in Mali, in Tanzania, in Zambia, in Botswana, showed actually that there were misuses and overuse and unfair distribution of water, as work shows in West and also in Eastern Africa that we have conducted. Previous water rights are often common property rights, but they were grabbed and taken away by state since colonial times up to now, leading to processes of privatization by which private companies use water for irrigation. You see, for instance, in Sierra Leone, the investment of a former Swiss company, ADAX, taking away land from local communities and also taking away water which was needed by women to have small-scale irrigation projects. On the other hand, you see Tanzania, a timber company, actually taking away water rights from local communities to prohibit irrigation and cultivation of fields because they were afraid that this could actually hamper their commercial production. So we have a lot of negative cases which we could sort of label as water grabbing in this context. Property rights in water governance matter from a social anthropological, ecological anthropology, and also political ecology perspective, because worldwide problems are not just there because of climate change, but are there because often property rights are defined since colonial times by state elites and during neoliberal times also by the private sector. And this is not just paying a sort of polemic political lip service. We have a lot of studies who show how these transformations take place. And I think water governance policy has to look into history and has to look at how these transformations has come about, because that leads then to the definition of actors. So it's no longer local users with the rules and regulations which are there, and I don't want to romanticize that everything in the past had been better, but there had been quite good solutions, as I tried to show very quickly. So the connex which we have is not just that we look on water, but it's also related to land grabbing. So it's complicated. It's not just that it's messy, but it's not just water. It's also all the other resources which are water linked. And you see here a picture of large-scale irrigation schemes where land and water have a connex in the grabbing context. So political economy analysis, I would argue also for the policy brief, could perhaps profit from something which we call new institutional political ecology analysis that asks, what are the processes and economic interests increasing actually the value of water, that suddenly some actors who are powerful can actually claim that water, the way they want to use it, has a high value. And then in a second step, impacts local power constellations of local users, that they don't have the power anymore to defend their land and to use the way to manage it. So that the more powerful, which are elites or the private sector, can say, well, it's privatization. That's the way, that's the institution which we want to go for water rights. And also this regarding this grabbing, regarding that this is more modern, this is more adaptive, this is also more sustainable if one has to pay for money in this context. This then leads also to the behavior of water users. We can have situations of unruled water bodies that will be overused because there are no rules and regulations, as the state is not able to manage it, and local rules also for management are not there anymore because they have been undermined. And distribution will be also very expensive or unfair, increasing then for the poor the pressure to overuse water, that little water, where they still have actually access. And specifically groundwater problems, providing pump to everybody going to the groundwater leads then to the depletion of the groundwater context, which is then actually more an institutional and organizational problem and not just a climate problem or a resource problem per se. On all these levels, power analysis from political ecology helps to see and understand who has the power to have influence on all these levels, meaning external level, creating a specific rise in value of water, for instance, then also the distributional effects. Who has the power to decide actually how it should be used, for what example? Should it be used for large hydropower or for decentralized irrigation controlled by local people to whom one has given the water rights? So we're talking also in very large areas in the global south, I would say, of green commons grabbing, as I would frame it. Also the problem with the SDGs, who should actually help to have to guide us to a more sustainable world. But here you have SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, that actually water is also used, then perhaps not for irrigation, but also for hydropower, without actually mentioning the issues of the commons. And this means excluding a large number of people from the property and from governance and from use of water. So this is really an issue also with the SDGs, that the commons are not mentioned, because that would be a way to discuss some of these problems historically and contemporarily. Let me come to some of the issues which we also learn from anthropology. In many societies, actually, water has a different meaning, means different uses, is interconnected with different other resources beyond just drinking water. It's irrigation, it's fisheries. You have seen a picture with wildlife being attracted in floodplains by water bodies who stay there when the water recedes, etc. Thus linking to the land and to the modern human species as well. So local common property institutions often reflect these multiple interconnections, as we can show from comparative research in African floodplain wetlands and other comparative studies on land grabbing. You see here pictures, for instance, of a ritual coordination of fisheries where people gather, wait for a ritual to be performed, and then go into the water and use fisheries. And similar of these things can also be seen by the governance and management of water bodies in local communities. This teaches us that we cannot just go for water alone, but we have to consider this interconnectedness and different views of the other common pool resources and also of other ontologies of local communities, which might be nice, you know, as a cultural diversity, but we can show that all these rituals were important for coordination, for instance, for water use. That means on the more policy level, what can be done? We have done a lot of work on where out of the chaos actually of taking away the commons, for instance, fisheries. You saw here, these were pictures in Zambia, where we established from the research side together with local research assistants a process whereby new institutions from the bottom up could be created to re-establish actually use of fisheries. And I think the same could be done also with water rights. So in Zambia, the issue came up through research that overfishing was taking place, where local people were discussing among themselves, helping with the help of us, creating a neutral platform, how the fisheries should be managed, because there was a possibility to shape bylaws to the national fishery law. And people took this up readily and brought in a lot of very interesting things. So we labeled this process constitutionality, meaning getting a sense of ownership of the institution building process from the bottom up, which was very, very helpful. And we have some publications here, which I cited. Also for water commons, there are new publications by Van Koppen, Restoring Commons, Gendered Analysis of Customary Water Tenure in Sub-Saharan Africa, because this is also an issue in many of these commons contexts. There are also gender aspects, which are very important. Just to conclude, what we could see from bottom-up institution building for common pool resources, here cases of fisheries and forestry, but I think we could also include water, is this was possible when a local view was there. We need new rules and regulations, and we want to have them. Then second, a participatory process that was addressing power asymmetries within local communities, which are there always and which have increased also since colonial times. Then often it helped that there were existing rules and regulations there, that people could sort of relate to something that happened in the past, and that their local knowledge, that would be number E, was recognized, creativity and social learning was there, and that the state was recognizing it. What I left out now is some message to the SDC, which would be acting as catalyzing agent. That was the case in many of those cases which we studied, which were bottom-up successful. The outside way of creating a neutral platform for discussions, anticipating power asymmetries, was actually one of the key elements, understanding the history and also facilitating a discussion process. That means not only having everybody at the table in the first minute, but anticipating power asymmetries means also knowing the power, different power interest groups, and having them discussed separately before pooling and trying to create something collective and something new. In that way, and that's my last slide, we had organized together University of Bern and University of Nairobi, the 19th International Biennial Conference of the International Association for the Study of the Commons, which was organized by Eleanor Ostrom. The conference was titled The Commons We Want, Between Historical Legacies and Future Collective Action. You can still go to the homepage. There's a movie on the conference and you can see what was presented. There are also a couple of presentations on water issues related to the commons, which we might find interesting. And that will be the end of my presentations. Many thanks for your interest and for listening to me. Thank you.
Thanks very much. That sets the stage very well for the discussions coming up, because of course this whole thread of looking at the system and how it works and maybe how it's been changed over time and the power relations involved are all crucial aspects of the political economy analysis way of looking at things. So without further ado, as I mentioned, we have 2 cases that we'll be looking at today, spending most of the rest of the time on those 2 cases. The first one will be presented by Javier Zubieta, who is the Sustainable Landscape Subprogram Manager at Helvetas, Bolivia, and he'll be discussing a case from that country. And then after that, and Jocelyn, who is an infrastructure advisor with the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office of the UK government, looking at a case study in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So as I mentioned, these first 2 presentations will be very short. They're really just to give you a taste of what the 2 cases are about, after which you can decide which group you will go into and look at the cases in more detail. So with that, let me hand over to Javier.
Thank you, Riff. Yes, and thanks to all the participants at the webinar. As Professor Haller said, water management is a conflict management. We will present a case of watershed management in areas of mining activity in Bolivia. Bolivia is a country that has an historical past related to mining activities, and well, all the problems that this situation for the pollution, for the scarcity of the water in these climate change times are producing between communities, because there are multiple uses of water, multiple users, multiple interests, and multiple conflicts. And yes, we try to share with you some ways and paths that we found with this PE analysis that bring us a window of solution, of hope in this complicated problem, and also complex.
Thanks a lot, Javier. And then over to Anne.
Great. So in 2 minutes, let me give you a taster of what we're going to be talking about in the second case study. Although, Javier, I want to come to yours. So that sounds really interesting. So we had a project in 2 cities in Eastern DRC, DR Congo, that were looking at an existing water supply system. So a network of pipes and some household connections and tap stands. And we were working to expand that system. So complex situation, fragile country, right? Lots of different players, lots of vested interests. And what we ended up trying to do was create a not-for-profit public-private partnership to manage the whole system, including the distribution of the water and the pricing of water and so on. So a really disruptive institutional arrangement, quite different. It was, if it worked, then it was potentially creating a model that could be used across the country. But the if it worked was highly dependent on understanding the political economy. So we actually had a program in our office that did political economy analyses for a number of different sectors and a number of different programs. So we used them, we commissioned them to do a PEA for us, which sort of was very timely, because there was, at the same time they were doing that, there was a new water law introduced that kind of allowed some of this disruption to happen and provided the right environment. But then it was all about, how do you work through all of those different players, all of the different challenges, all of the different vested interests to try and come up with a workable solution. So if you're interested in water supply, if you're interested in complexity and fragile contexts, if you're interested in changing management streams, then come to the second.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anne. So while everyone is thinking about which group they might join, I can just describe the process very briefly. You will soon have the opportunity to join a breakout room of your choice. We will be using a platform called Padlet for note-taking. Now that's, for most people, not relevant, but we will ask for, in each group, a rapporteur, a volunteer rapporteur who can take some notes based on the set of questions that you'll be discussing. And then also would give a quick presentation of the highlights back in plenary when we come back, because it would be nice for the people in one group to hear about the discussions in the other group. The other thing to say is if there's a really big imbalance, because we feel it's important for you to have the choice of which group you would go to. However, if there's a big imbalance, we might ask for one or a few people to shift from one group to another, just to kind of maintain that balance, because there's close to 40 people altogether. So maybe I could just tell you briefly about the Padlet if you're not familiar with it. This is a bit of a small couple of screenshots, but basically where that orangish arrow is on the left-hand screenshot, there's just a plus sign underneath each of those sections, and those sections correspond to the questions that you will be presented with in your group. And the rapporteur can just click on the plus sign there, and that will result in a pop-up window on the right-hand side. You can see it, which is basically where you can type in a few notes, click publish, and that will appear as a note underneath that section. And if you happen to put a note in the wrong section, you can easily just click on it and drag it to the other section. So that's not a problem. So it's quite easy to use. So I think we can probably just go ahead with the group work. We scheduled 30 minutes. I think we'll probably only be able to use about 25 because we're running a little bit late, but hopefully that will be enough for you to have a meaningful discussion. So Martin, please go ahead with I think a couple. Oh, someone has a mic open, now it's closed. You may have noticed that we may put a bit of extra time there for you because the groups are rather large and it takes a bit of time to get going. So hopefully that was at least enough to get some discussion going. Although that also means that we don't have time for discussion in plenary, but rather would spend the time with the reporting back. So hopefully that is okay for people. Do we have rapporteurs from each of the groups who could share the screen with the Padlet? Maybe I would just say, to make it easy, to start with the Bolivia case, as that was the first teaser presented. Who would be the Bolivia rapporteur?
Yes, I'm the sorry.
Okay.
I am the Bolivia rapporteur. I'm sorry, I didn't take notes in the Padlet.
Okay.
If needed, I can do it later on. And in background, you hear my son who has to come. We have to pick him up. We had to pick him up because he's sick at the kit. I'm sorry about that.
For that.
Yes, I will try to sum up the discussion we had in the group one. Thank you again to Javier for the interesting presentation. It was an animated discussion. Maybe without to go into the detail, I think one takeaway is the importance of the analysis of stakeholder, really understanding who is who and their interest. And I think Javier has put it in a clear way, saying we don't have to be naive. We are really to understand the interest of of each involved party. In relation to the importance of the stakeholder analysis, also the fact that the deeper, the more complicated, and at some time we have also to say, okay, now we have either to conclude the analysis, you have to conclude the analysis and to go forward with what you were able to do, but there is also this kind of tension between understanding and analysis and resources. Then a second aspect was interesting. We use a metaphor of a full glass. Usually when we start working, in this case was a shared water basin, there is already a sort of historical background. The glass is already full with, let's say, prior tension, prior interest, and it's really important to understand what there is inside of the glass. And maybe also, and this was something the Professor Haber says, it's also important not only to understand what is inside the glass, but also to understand how we want to communicate it, because it is at the beginning of the analysis that you might do a damage that then you will not be able to recover from. So meaning understanding what was the past and find a way how to address the possible tension or conflict or difficulties of the project. And the third point is also that at the end of the day, we can say that political economic analysis is really to understand the rule of the game, but then decide whether to change it or be able to change it is another topic. And if the colleague have some additional comments then they are more than welcome.
Thank you. I think we don't have a lot of time, but maybe just Javier, if you've managed to fix your internet connection, if you have anything you wanted to add, otherwise we'll go to the other group.
No, thanks. Sorry for the connection, but I'm here again. No, I think that it was a good wrap up of Jonathan.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, no, and there's obviously a lot more that can be said, but at least, I mean, one of the main issues here is trying to get a better sense of the importance of this kind of analysis and some of the challenges and some of the potential benefits. Then over to the DRC case, who would be the rapporteur for that one?
I can share the screen, the notes.
Thank you.
There. So this is not, it's not a summary of what we discussed, because our discussion was very scattered. Everything was interesting, but to answer exactly these questions, so we only have a few things that address these questions. Our conversation was very fruitful in every direction. The first question was very interesting. How did the PEA change your approach or intervention? There was a question: how many political analysis, economy analysis are requested or are good to do? And the example here was one. It was made one in year 1 and one in year 5. And so they did it twice in this program, but doing twice was underdoing. The first was just a glimpse, but the second political economy analysis was much more lighter, but much more frank and much more, so it was eye-opening doing these exercises. Another topic was, because this had to be the topic involved on public-private partnerships, so they needed to bring an expert on this. Most crucial factors for a successful PEA was this was from the presentation from Tobias. We stuck there and talked about who are the commons and what are they. This was, but defining who are the stakeholders, undefined stakeholders, that is important. And then and also another question is, or that is difficult, is setting the core question, because doing a political economy analysis has to be around one topic. But since all these topics are interconnected, which one do you set as the most important, or which one do you want to attack first? So keeping the priority or keeping the core question is a little bit challenging. One key question to drive a political economy analysis is to see who wins and who loses. And it was also recommended, the better we do the political economy analysis, the better the implementation later on the results will be. Another comment we had from one participant was of the challenges is that sometimes if we have multi-donor trust funds, there might be also multi-donor interests, or not so much in the project's focus, but maybe on how to do the things. What are the right, if the project will promote management structures, but what kind of management structures is going to be promoted? And here multi-donors might have multi preferences, and that might be challenging to manage as a program implementer. So these was some of the comments I captured, but we talked more, a lot more.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Of course, obviously these things are selective processes. Let me ask, Anne, do you have anything to add there in this case?
Broad conversation. I'd just say the status quo exists because it benefits some people, and that's often not the expected beneficiaries, right? So understanding that just helps us to do the right, figure out what the right things are.
Right.
Great job, Rita.
Okay, thanks very much. And yeah, as I said, unfortunately, we don't really have time for discussion at this point, but there's a huge number, I'm sure, of relevant points raised. And when it comes to either timing or resources or choices between, you know, how deep you go and how broad you set the parameters. But I think what would have come out in both cases would be the potential benefits, even if there are challenges, various kinds of potential benefits of being driven by that more sophisticated understanding of power relationships and interests and ways in which you can engage different stakeholders. And I can say from the Helvetis point of view, we also try to think about, you know, we're often not system actors, we're coming from an external perspective. So really playing a facilitative role in trying to create space for system actors to exchange and to be able to be involved in these kinds of processes is actually quite an important role for external organizations such as ourselves. So with that, we are coming to a close in a few minutes, but before that, maybe I could hand over to Delphine Magara from SCAT, who would have a few questions for us to provide a bit of feedback on this very preliminary but hopefully interesting discussion that we've had so far. Delphine, are you available?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Riff.
Thanks.
So as it's important for us to understand how useful this session was for you and what you would need to use PA more often in your work, we have created a small poll, which I'm gonna launch right now. It should appear now on your screen. And if you scroll down, you have 2 questions, which you can take your time to fill in. And then we have one more question, which you would need to write your answers in the chat, which is there anything specific that would help you to make more use of PA in your work? And I'm also going to paste this into the chat, and you can answer it directly there. Of course, it is all optional. Okay. Have a minute to fill in everything.
So let me just share the results of the poll that are coming up now. I think most people have had an opportunity to look at them. I don't know if people can see them now.
It was just a glimpse and it was gone.
Now
we can see it.
Okay, thank you for that. It's always useful to get a sense of the room, as it were, to see how people are feeling. So thanks, Delphine, for that. And you can see that people are adding a few things to the chat in terms of what might be useful for being able to do this more often, because obviously when it's something that we're not doing on a regular basis, it's also a challenge just because it's not familiar. Now, I don't know, I would like to hand over, I'm not sure whether Danielle and Andreas would like to make a few kind of closing comments, but if so, please go ahead.
Thank you, Riff. Yes, Andreas will speak after me. I will just try to make some conclusions from the 90 minutes webinar, if you allow. And the first thing is, just remember the two slides Andreas showed, the car and the more complex system. And I think I realized that we're still struggling even with the instruction to put the car together, you know. And it seems that it is really a challenge to be able to address the right questions. And Innocent in our group from Nigeria told us that he has a case where local communities are suffering from oil drilling, who is polluting the water, and water is the livelihood of the people there. So what does it mean? It means that in development cooperation, we really need to be careful to address the root causes and not work on symptoms. And I think that such a political economy analysis can help us to try to be more stringent in that, and also be more confident if we try to understand the functioning of the whole societal system, the power games, the hidden powers, etc. This is really key. Else we cannot find durable solutions. Then another thought is probably we should not reduce the discussion to the economic value of water. I think it's really clear that water has a societal usefulness and relevance, and that is also not a mechanical thing. So all the cultural elements, as were mentioned, are really, really important, and I think we need to make more efforts. And then again and again, I think that we are facing the problem of we want to help the poor, but we enter into a power game. We have to depower often certain stakeholders, and we want to empower those who are not. But this is not an easy thing. It has also conflicts as a consequence, and therefore probably creating platforms and possibilities to bring different stakeholders from different levels and shareholders as well to a table to discuss and try to find a solution is really key to make sure that we can succeed. I will end with a last thought from the Aguazan workshop, which took place just recently in Martigny on digitalization in water. I think we also may have to consider sometimes whether we need conditionalities in development cooperation. If we see that things are going wrong, like in the case of Nigeria, can we just close our eyes and continue to do certain projects and programs, or should we really have the responsibility and the strength to address the real issues and try to fix the problems in a way that we have really durable solutions that we are providing? That's all from my side. So over to you, Andreas. Thanks. And thanks to everyone again for participating actively and also for joining this webinar.
From my end, I will just limit myself to thank everyone, especially to Javier and Anne for exposing their cases, and also Riff and Delphine for organizing this webinar. And just my last point is we are really open to continue the discussion, to have more of these exchanges, and also to our colleagues working with SDC or an SDC finance project. We also have some ways in how we can support you. So do not hesitate to reach out to us, and we are more than happy to deepen these discussions with you. Thank you very much. Back to you, Riff.
Thanks a lot, Danielle and Andreas, and also a thanks from my side for the support of the organizing team and the facilitators, as well as the participants. For me, it's as a facilitator, I find an active group is an interesting and interested group, and you make your own benefits to a certain extent when you participate in these discussions. So it's really great to hear that it was useful for people. Not only that, you actually have about maybe a minute and a half of extra time because we can finish early. So you can put that time to use in whatever way you want. thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, and see you next time. It was very.
Thank you.
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. I really
Take
enjoyed
care.
the section. You know, I've learned so much today. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye, Innocent. Thank you.
Thank you and bye-bye.